behalf of Monash Tech Talks, I'd like to welcome you to our discussion today on emerging jobs in data science and AI. My name is Brad Howarth. I will be your facilitator for this discussion over the course of the next hour. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start by respectfully asking you to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Barralong peoples of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners and custodians of the land upon which myself and many of you are meeting today, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging of that nation. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands from which you might be joining us from today, as well as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are also part of our celebration. Thank you, and I acknowledge you all. Thank you so much. All right, we have three fantastic experts who are going to be dazzling you with their insights and fielding your questions. Firstly, I'd like to bring into the conversation Professor Dragan Gasevic, who's the Director for Centre of Learning Analytics at Monash. Dragan, give us a wave.
Hello there.
He specialises in learning analytics. He is a computer scientist by training, focuses on developing computational methods that can shape next generation learning and software technologies, and advances our understanding of information seeking, sense making, and self-regulated and social learning. We're also being joined by Rita Arrigo, digital architect and advisor, a renowned digital specialist and somebody I've known now for a good 25 years, so I can definitely vouch for her, with a reputation for leading digital transformation projects in the public and private sector. Rita is able to communicate complex technical ideas across the IT divide, including to non-geek stakeholders, as she likes to say. In her role at Microsoft previously as a digital advisor over a 5-year period, she supported technology industry to understand how technologies, including artificial intelligence, machine learning, and mixed reality, can be applied in various sectors, not least of which have been transport, education, health, citizen engagement, sustainable development, and inclusion. Our third guest for today is Ragu Mantatikar, who's the Head of Service Delivery at Scale. Ragu brings 25 years of experience in the APAC region in service management with many industry certifications and specializations in managing artificial intelligence programs of work. He has a graduate diploma in business management from Monash University, and he's now co-founder of the Silicon Valley unicorn startup Scale. And I'm sure he'll tell you a little bit more about it in a moment. So thank you all for joining us. So I'm assuming everyone out there has got a great interest in AI, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And we all know now that it's been many decades since Arthur C. Clarke probably first welcomed us into the world of what AI could pose for his homicidal computer in the film 2001. We've come a long way since then, to the point now where artificial intelligence is now embedded in our lives, often in ways that we don't even consider or even realize. But exactly what will the impact of artificial intelligence be, particularly when it comes to us as individuals and the way that we go about living our lives, importantly, the way we go about earning an income? We hear a lot of people predicting that potentially artificial intelligence will take our jobs. But then we also hear a growing voice of people that tell us that artificial intelligence will create new jobs. So which jobs will go? Which jobs are yet to come? Which jobs are emerging today? And importantly, what are the skills that we really need to be investing in, both as individuals and as leaders of our organizations, to make sure that we can take advantage of those opportunities as they emerge? So these are the topics that we're proposing for today's discussion, but I'm going to get things kicked off by putting a question to Rita. So I thought just to set a benchmark or some, to lay the foundation for our discussion today, can I start by asking you to please put a quick definition around it, data science and AI? What is it that we are actually describing here?
Thanks, Brad. Great question. And I really think it's a great question to answer, because as we move from being consumers of stuff to this idea of societal innovation, where we want to solve complex problems and address some of the huge challenges, from environmental sustainability to accessibility, AI and data science will have a vital role in this, in allowing us to augment our world. For example, AI in customer service, where we can use intelligent chatbots that can predict your needs and learn and talk to you via digital assistants like Alexa or Google, or AI in healthcare, where we can have quantum-inspired algorithms to increase the speed of scans and improve accuracy to create real-time prediction, with AI algorithms to assist clinicians to improve patient safety and well-being, like the amazing Australian health informatic leader Alcidian, as well as holographic surgery that can use this heads up and guidance and learn. So the other other area that's going to be really big in AI is transportation and smart cities. And it's going to be one of the greatest disruptions of our era, with autonomous driving and flying, zero accidents, with AI-enabled computer vision on our roads, to the merging of the physical and digital into digital twins to create cyber-physical simulation to understand the present and predict the future, as well as AI and sustainability, where we will learn how to protect our species, agriculture and climate, with IoT-enabled platforms to sequester carbon and sense and regenerate our environment.
So no real impact at all then, basically. There's nothing.
Definitely not.
An awful lot to unpack in a relatively short answer. And I'm sure we'll get to not the bottom of those issues throughout this conversation, but I certainly look forward to exploring them with you in a little bit more depth. Now, Dragan, how does AI and analytics influence the work that you're doing when it comes to being the director of the Centre for Learning Analytics at Monash?
Yeah, no, thanks so much for the question, Brad. And obviously, I think for the audience might be also interesting, because I suspect that not many of them also know what we mean by learning analytics. And it's a relatively new emerging field that was set up about 10 years ago, in which we are trying to use a range of different AI-driven data science methods for the sake of understanding and optimizing human learning and the environments in which that learning occurs. And obviously, AI is a central component of everything what we are doing in the Center of Learning Analytics. But I'd basically say that there are generally kind of two major areas that we are interested in. The first one is trying to work out new types of technologies, algorithms, and even overall approaches or organizational changes that are related to the transformation of the things how we do in formal educational systems as well as informal educational systems. And so when I say basically formal, we go from K-12 to higher education, and then informal, we basically go into different workplaces. We work, for example, with different hospitals, with many other different types of organizations. But a second other important thing for us is also to think about how we can empower people for the age of AI. What are those type of skills that we need to have to be able to work and live in the age of AI? Some of the recent surveys, for example, in 2018, World Economic Forum published a report about the impact of automation on jobs, and basically indicated that skilling and reskilling and upskilling is one of the critical components of the AI for the kind of future workforce, and indicating basically different types of tensions as well when we are talking about that, the extent to which companies are willing to upskill and reskill some of the workforce, or it is cheaper for them to just simply replace them with a completely new qualified workforce when a new technology comes, which is a fairly dystopian type of a future that we can also think about. So those are the types of tensions that we can think about. So in terms of reimagining this type of education with AI, what we are thinking is basically about the new ways how AI can help us to better assess people in far more authentic settings, so that people, instead of basically being in a fairly sanitized environments, being tested for some of these big tests that are out there, like PISA testing that is used by even our government to show how we are lagging behind everybody else. And often that setting is basically collaboration tests that just you collaborating with a computer, but can you also collaborate with other people when we are testing you to kind of have some of your collaboration skills? And we're also kind of trying to think about the ways how predictive modeling can be used in some of these things, but at the same time, always thinking about the social impact of some of these AI technologies and implementations.
Got it. And certainly it's an interesting topic at the moment with border closures and the difficulty we're going to have of bringing skills into Australia. The question of how do we go about reskilling the people we've got, I think, is one that's going to become a lot more interesting over the course of the next 12 to 24 months. Ragu, now, your organisation, we described it as a unicorn. They used to be called unicorns because they were uncommon, but as I understand it, there's hundreds of these things now, so we probably need a new word to describe you. But tell me a little bit about your company in terms of what Scale does and how it uses AI to do what it does.
Awesome. Thanks for that question. It's been asked every sales call we jump in, or every investor's call we jump in. This is the first question they ask. So our unicorn differentiator is we looked at, when we started this company, we looked at AI in a different aspect. Like you can talk any terminology. I can give you 20 acronyms: hyperautomation, AI, ML, NLG. Like I can give you 100 acronyms, but at the end of the day, the automation or the AI is as good as the how many data sources you're going to connect to. Today's world, enterprises enterprise consists of a ton of applications. So when we looked at it, we said, like, how are we going to connect into all these applications? Our motto was not to buy another application. So how can we make a universal adapter where we can connect into all these systems and then pull the data and provide a meaningful reports to the decision makers or the users so that they can actually use the data. So the task has been done by a ton of employees, right? I mean, again, the question comes like, all these employees are going to go when we actually do the AI implementation, but people are not meant to do the drudgery. Like if you ask me to do the same thing every Monday morning, probably I'm not using my creative side of the brain, right? So let the computer do that work so that I can use my brain, which is meant to be doing creative and then analytical, and then ask the right questions to get some information into that. So when we started 4 years ago now, it became very popular universal adapter, and we changed the concept into digital employees. So we call our all agents, or whatever the terminology industry uses, we call that as a digital employee. So digital employee doesn't need a sick leave. He or she doesn't bother about the COVID. They work 24/7 and they provide the results accurately. There is no human error involved in it. And then you're getting the data, which we do sentiment analysis, predictive analysis, and then suggestive analysis, so that if you ask a question, we can suggest you that, you might say, I'm looking for a flight from here to Denver, and the next question it says that, do you want to book this on the day what you're looking for? That's like a suggestive analysis. Or, sorry for my language, if someone is pissed off with the agent talking, and then suddenly you can say like, there is a terminology used like, you don't get it, or you don't understand what I'm saying. So that is a sentiment analysis we pick, and then probably we connect a agent back to that, saying that, just take care of this person because he's not understanding the language of the mission. So we developed the concept of digital employees, so the digital workforce, which is going to take over the drudgery what we do, so that employees are much more creative and much more productive at work, so that increases the productivity and the work satisfaction, and then they look forward to come to work rather than call a sick today because I don't want to do the same job.
Got it. Thank you. So Rita, what would you say are the emerging jobs in data science and AI today?
Well, it starts with data engineering, where data is collected responsibly. A lot of the stuff that Ragu was talking about, that's a really important part of, being able to have that data inventory within your organization so that you can mine it and learn from it. And so that's a data engineering role. Through to being able to be a non-technical person and use AI-enabled solutions like Twitter is using at the moment. They're using a speech service to enable Twitter Spaces, which allows them to convert the text to convert speech to text to make their app more accessible. And that I find that really interesting, because I think a lot of people, don't realize that you can actually use a lot of these auto ML tools that allow you to bring a lot of the power of data science into your applications without actually having to be a data scientist. Which brings me to the other new role, which is obviously a data scientist that uses algorithms to model and predict data, through to domain experts. Like I work a lot with engineers, doctors, scientists that want to use AI and data to actually improve the way they do their work. And so that means being able to build apps, etc., that become more powerful for them. So there's that whole combination of the domain expert, the data engineer, the data scientist, and then we have these like emerging roles like the personal brain trainer that might help you to master your brain computer interface, the autonomous car licensing specialist. So we know that there'll be a need to operate that autonomous vehicle, as humans will need to step in to steer things, because as it becomes more intelligent and the spatial reasoning increases, through to something that Ragu was talking about, which is that business to robot to consumer marketing manager, the B2R2C marketing manager, that will work with voice assistants and robots to market your brand. So that's just some examples of some of the new roles. But I think what's also really interesting is it's it's this world where, you know, the IT department is going and it's AI is becoming part of our fabric, and, you know, people are starting to use that are non-technical, and I think that's some of the most exciting areas of innovation in that space.
And certainly what I hear from that is two different streams. One is the data professional, the data scientist or the data engineer or variations of, and then you've got the other form of professional, which can be any number of things, all the way down from truck drivers through to civil engineers or whatever it might be, who will be working with the AIs and require a set of skills around that. So, Dragan, probably a good question to put to you then is what do you see as being the skills that people will need to develop in actually to perform some of the roles that Rita's been describing here?
No, thanks much, Brad. And that's a really outstanding summary of the potential roles that Rita was talking about. I mean, there are obviously kind of these two major streams, as you said, and indicated basically for data professionals or AI, in a way, engineers, if you wish, and then the other one is for everybody else. And I basically kind of say is that some of the common threads, though, is that basically, regardless of some of the technical skills, I don't want to go kind of into the specific type of technical skills that data engineers need to have or AI engineers and so on. I think most of the IT professionals are becoming more and more aware. There are some other type of kind of critical skills that are really necessary. I remember when we were in the early days talking about what is needed for learning analyst or data scientist in learning analytics to have in terms of the skills. The skill that emerged always was communication skills. So you need to be able to communicate with a range of different types of stakeholders. There's another critical thing that we are seeing, and we are seeing that in learning analytics, but I'm also kind of interacting with also health analytics professionals, is really good understanding of the problem domains you're working in. That kind of just being able to use certain data crunching methods and being able to disrupt a particular sector is really hard. Especially in some established professions, unless you really don't understand them well. And that's also the kind of feedback we are getting also here in the Department of Data Science and AI at Monash by working with the different industry partners. I think equally so when we are talking about the broader population, including professionals from other areas as well as data professionals, what we need to really think about is what is that kind of toolkit people need to have so they are able to easily kind of reskill or upskill. And what we need to do is in that process, and that's not what we are doing really good in our educational systems, is basically equipping people to learn effectively by themselves as well. Having these, what we call self-regulating learning skills. So being able to kind of learn some information, operate on it, be able to kind of transition and independently work on it. Another critical set of skills is for us also is what does it mean to be AI? I mean, for many kids in schools, they are really exposed often to AI, and yet our classrooms are often banning the use of mobile devices and so on. So the kind of that early exposure to AI is really essential. So that means really equipping also our teachers, equipping all our kids in schools to be able to comfortably interact with AI, to critically appraise the threats that AI may also bring, for example, in terms of misinformation or fake news that are out there available, and creating that kind of culture. It is also equally important for us, and we don't understand that even conceptually, what does it mean to team up between human and machines? And I think that'll be a really important thing. We are often talking lately to different clinicians who are interested in using different AI methods for diagnostics, and yet they are also at the same time feeling that their organizations are not ready to adopt some of these AI innovations in terms of whether they are going to be punitively used against them or not, or the extent to which human is trusted to make certain decisions versus a machine. So those are the kind of frameworks that we also need to create as we are creating some of these type of skills. We obviously need to work also additionally on the kind of communication methods and the types of etiquettes that are important when we are communicating with other humans through AI. And that's really another critical and essential type of skill that we need to think about. Obviously, there are plenty of other. I think we are relatively early days in some of these type of conversations, but I think it's really important for us to bear in mind some of the societal as well implications, as well as the kind of the ethics that is behind the use of particular types of AI, and also helping people even develop their privacy agency to exercise their kind of protection of the private data and understanding what are the implications in different types of workplaces as a part of our skill set that we need to have as professionals of the future.
There's certainly nothing wrong with being in front of the discussion. Sorry, Rita.
I'm finding that a lot of organizations are creating their own kind of ethics committees where they'll talk about, you know, and discuss and think about the kind of ethics of the way that they're using AI in their organization. So it's very exciting. So it kind of brings in the non-technical and really starts thinking about some of these more complex areas.
Right. So we're getting
in on the topic, Rita, that's a very good point. We discuss with a lot of industry professionals and then the CEOs and CIOs in the Silicon Valley. So the biggest point, we were having a chat with some car manufacturer who's doing autonomous driving, right? So which you touched the point. The ethical discussion is, if you have an accident, who is going to be responsible for it? Right? Just think about it, like, is the driver's license, insurance, how the insurance is going to come. So AI is not just people think that AI is taking the job, but it's creating multiple facets of thinking, like, you know, how the insurance is going to change, if something happens, how is the decision is going to make, like one person is going to be injured versus 40 people going to be injured, right? So that analytical part of that is where the pretty much jobs have been exposed in the industry right now.
Right. So Ragu, I'll stay with you just for a moment, but then I'll start bringing in some of the audience questions because we're getting a good number of them coming up here. But as a data and analytics and AI professional, how did you go about educating yourself and building up your own skill set that's enabled you to do what you do today?
Very good question. Somebody was asking me two weeks ago the same. When I was doing my master's in Swinburne University, I was doing typical master's in information technology, learn software engineering, object-oriented programming, and then everything. Worked for so long, and then kind of I opened my startup in Australia. Then when I had to come here to start my other startup, then I was like, no clue what AI is, what's an artificial. And Monash, when I was doing it, just let's have a little bit of fun. I think serious discussion is enough. So when I was doing my Monash MBA, there was an IT subject, and then the subject 3 months they asked us to do comparison between Qantas website with the British Airways website. I'm like, at an MBA level going into 2010, that's not going to cut it, right? That's not going to get me a job in a senior management role. Then I was like, okay, how do I enhance myself? And then moved into service management and whatever. But there are few free websites where you could get your basics understanding, like something, you know, if you guys are into deeplearning.ai, I don't know whether you guys look at it. One of the popular websites, Andrew, he was ex-Google, set up a free website. It's called deeplearning.ai. Just go ahead and enroll the subjects. If you are a senior person, it gives you a basic understanding of what is an MLE is, what is AI is, what is NLP is. I'm just using acronyms, but if anybody needs, I'm more than happy to explain. But then working with the code, I understood that there is much more than what I knew. So I started educating myself, watching the videos. Simple thing, like even today I struggle to get a good skill set who actually worked on certain things. You know, I got so many, we are about 60 people now, and then every week we are recruiting 2 to 3 people, and then it's getting harder and harder to find a right set of people with the right skill set. Now everyone goes R, I know ML with the model setting up, but how are you going to work with the data, with the customer, and then marry up with the model what you set up, and then you train the system to behave certain way. So that is the like business acumen versus the technical side of it is what bigger gap I see.
And I agree with you, Ragu. I think that's really big. And, you know, one way that I learned is I did AI business school, and it really helped me to kind of understand, how do you create an AI culture? How do you do an AI strategy? How do you get the business case to invest in?
Yeah.
How do you scale AI? How do you talk to business people about it? And it's a great little online course you can do that's online at the moment. I'll put it in the chat window.
Yeah. So there are quite a few areas where you could develop, but at the end of the day, you know, I mean, if you are in the workforce, try to be proactive. Like, you know, what can I do rather than looking at, you know, typical way of workforce, right? I mean, how can I automate it? How can I process automation first? And how do I get to the optimum level? Then hand it over to mission to take care of it. So those kind of things actually when we talk to the, like say we developed a voice connector to our platform with a Google Assistant or an Alexa, or we got our own voice system. The CIO driving into the work, getting full information what happened overnight, setting up a meeting with Brad at 10 a.m. or Dragan at 2 p.m. So it automatically figures out what calendar gap I have, and then I can put the meeting invitation before I come into work, right? I can do like 30 to 40% of my before lunch work while I'm driving. So that is live and active right now with our customers using it. So at the time, I have a clear mind when I walk in, because in San Francisco Bay Area, it takes 2 hours to go from one area to other area. Even 30 kilometers, 40 kilometers, it will take 2 hours. So my time has been just listening to some podcast or anything. Rather, I would do voice activated work, so that by the time I reach, maybe I can go and grab a cup of coffee rather than just jumping onto the straight away work, because I've done almost 20 to 30% of my work in the car.
Got it. All right, so I'm going to start going to some audience questions here, because we've got a good number that have come in. I'm just going to do an experiment though, because sometimes we forget how people, how deeply entrenched these technologies are in our life. Okay, Google, play some music. Now, if anyone has had music play in the background, please put a note into the chat window and let me know. I could also do it with Alexa as well, but I'm just going to do it with Google and see if that actually set anything off. But it's fascinating to think how quickly we've embraced these technologies in our own lives. But Rita, I just want to put a question to you from the audience here. There's a significant lack of investment and funding of sufficient data science tools within larger organizations. How do you see the technology translator role contributing to assisting organizations seeing the benefit of data science and how important it is to fundamentally get artificial intelligence right?
Well, Brad, I think that's one of the, and I love that question, but it's that ability to be able to tell stories about what's possible. And I think that creating that vision is so important to get your investment in those projects. And, I talked about societal innovation and some of the stuff that we want to do in health and some of the stuff that we want to do in smart cities. So it's about finding that business case for your business that will then help you drive that capability to be invested in. And the other thing is we've also got to imagine that, in a world where you're Ragu and you're building a product, then you do hire high-end data scientists that are developers that can know R. But if you're in a business and you may want to use some auto ML stuff, you can also start to use some of these more non-technical tools to add AI to your solutions with APIs in different ways. So it's not necessarily about having to have data scientists hanging around all the time.
All right, so Rita, I've got another question here, and I think I'm going to have to direct this one to you, but if anyone else wants to chime in, then please do so. Have there been any meaningful discussions at a government level with regard to tangible results, milestones, planning and commitments, etc., to translate AI-supported economy into productivity standards? So the examples here, reducing from a 5-day work to a 3, or etc. I'm just wondering, are we starting to find governments and government planners and executives and bureaucrats starting to think about the impact that these will have on society?
Absolutely. We've got a federal government AI strategy. We've got a New South Wales AI government strategy. We've got a Queensland one, and we've got a real emerging one coming up in Victoria. But, we're very practical in Victoria, and we've attached a lot of our AI thinking around how we're going to create sustainability and environmental change. We're always different, right? And so I think that's kind of amazing to see the government think about, using these technologies to solve these complex problems like the environmental challenges that we're facing.
Got it. Dragan, there's a question here for you. I'm interested in your thoughts on whether AI will enable us to link learning with wealth.
That's an interesting question. I think it's relatively also open, so I'm not completely sure what it's hinting to, but I'm going to say what's my understanding, and I'm going to answer to that. So the first thing is there is already kind of existing evidence in the literature through numerous studies about the association between the level of education and the personal income that somebody may have. So I think that's basically one of the kind of the well-established things. With respect to the use of learning analytics, what we've seen across the world is basically use of learning analytics, at least in the early days, about 10, 15 years ago, when we were only in early days, was to kind of help us to increase the number of university graduates. And universities across the US, but also in Australia as well, invested a fair bit about understanding and predicting the students who are potentially at risk of failing particular degrees in early days of their completion. Then really the critical other thing was that those organizations or those educational organizations who managed to do that, they actually recognized that the problem wasn't just to identify the students who were potentially at risk, but it was equally so to identify the means and the organizational support structures that can help these individuals to actually proceed with their further learning. So what we've seen is that some absolutely remarkable universities, like in the US, Georgia State University, which managed to turn around for an increase between 8 or 9% their overall retention and graduation rates of the students through these type of things, and in this way also increase significantly the opportunities for their students in their future careers and lives. What we are also hoping with learning analytics, and that's one of the priorities of what we are working on here at Monash University, is basically analytics for curriculum and employment. And that's basically one of the kind of the critical things that we are thinking about, is understanding what are those emerging skills, emerging priorities that are happening on the job market, mapping those onto the existing curricula that are available in formal education, making sure that universities are more in response to the needs that are out there happening, at the same time also being able to personalize learning types of experiences for individuals and making sure that they can also proceed with the types of careers and jobs that they have in the future.
So I'm going to pop another one of my questions in here and then go back to the ones from the audience. But thinking from the perspective of an employer, how can I actually plan for a future with AI analytics in my organization? What are the skills that I should be either developing amongst my people or potentially bringing in from the outside that are going to help me to do that and to make most of the technologies that are coming down quite quickly now? So maybe, Dragan, I might throw that to you first and then ask someone else to step in.
No, thanks. I think it's a really important question. To me, and I think Rita to a certain extent already hinted some of the critical needs, and that's basically that you can't just simply buy or outsource AI for an organization to do certain things. One critical and most important thing in my view is that organization needs to see AI as a strategic priority. And when you basically start implementing AI in many levels, you also need to think about what does that mean in terms of the implications for your organization. There is no any more business as usual. You really need to think about the changes of the organizational structures. You also need to think about specialized teams that are necessary to be kind of thought through about some of these things. So really in many organizations as well, what we are seeing is that they need to even think about potentially changes in their business models, how they're operating. So that's my kind of view, is that you don't want to basically have an AI project in an organization unless there's really kind of a strong strategic support that is coming from the organization and from the leadership. Once you have that type of support, then the second important thing is to kind of be able to engage with the relevant stakeholders that are in part of your organization. They're going to be primarily responsible for that, or whose primary business is going to be also affected with that. Once you have these type of things identified, then you are also then bringing in relevant technical skills as well that can help you to meet your strategic priorities and affect the organizational change. And then over time, start basically creating the types of AI and implementing it and evaluating over time as well as you are implementing some of these things. We've seen some of these things. I've been mostly talking and directly working in the education sector, as well as more recently in the healthcare sector as well.
Got it. Thank you. You know, actually, I was just thinking about the question asking about wealth. I think it also depends on our definition of wealth, whether we think about that as being monetary or whether we think about wealth in other ways. I know for me, and looking at what Ragu's company is doing, you know, one of the greatest commodities in my life is time. And if you've got an AI system that could put time back into my day, then that's something I'd greatly consider to be a beneficial outcome. One of the things we did talk about earlier was bias and ethics. And there's a question that's come up here that addresses that specifically. So I'm going to maybe ask Rita to take this on first, but then I'm once again more than happy for anyone else to jump on top of it. Can the panelists talk about bias in AI systems, especially when it comes to biases in ethnic group, sex, geographic location, demographics, etc.? And I suppose more, as importantly as that, how can we ensure that we are guarding against bias? Rita, you got an answer to that?
Well, a lot of people are conforming to responsible AI guidelines, which allows us to make sure there's fairness, reliability and safety, privacy, security, inclusion, transparency, and accountability. So they're amazing principles, but sometimes, the kind of time and energy it takes to implement them is very expensive. So you'll find that a lot of AI vendors like Microsoft and Google and other companies are, giving us systems to make that easier. So Microsoft's got one called FairLearn, which empowers AI developers to add negative impacts and mitigate the negative impacts of groups such as race, gender, age, and disability status. So you'll really find that there's a real evolution in that. And I think even in our own physical world before AI, there was so much bias, like, applying for a home loan. In the beginning, you couldn't be a woman and apply for a home loan, right? And so, there's been so much bias in that. And I think a lot of the systems that we're thinking of developing and working on, and if they conform to these guidelines and we start to use a lot of these tools to make it easier to ensure that there isn't that kind of bias, I think we're actually going to solve some of the challenges that actually existed before AI as well.
Dragan, I sense that you are very keen to answer this one because you put your hand up, so go for it. And then Ragu, I'd like
absolutely.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. Happy to address this question. I mean, we've been studying a fair bit recently also bias and understanding of that, and there's kind of a prevalent understanding as well that we know is that basically often our data and thus our algorithms are also reflecting the biases that we have. It's really well-known cases of the different criminal justice systems in the US, but also potentially some other countries where you have these predictive algorithms. They are heavily biased towards certain people of different ethnic or racial backgrounds. And that's really well understood. To me, what I would basically say, while it is important to kind of understand these sources of bias, and AI can be a really good way to detect that bias, is also that when we are educating people in AI, we need to really educate them from the very start to think about that bias. So that means really, and there are now recently also the metrics that we can create when you are kind of creating your predictive model, that is not only telling you how accurate your model and what particular groups are potentially kind of where there's confusion happening with your predictive models, but also that equally so you need to measure the bias of your models across particular dimensions, like for example, gender, or is that basically ethnic background and so on. And that's basically, in my view, is when we are kind of creating and evaluating these models, our future data scientists and artificial intelligence engineers need to really be able to check their models, report these metrics with respect to the bias to the relevant stakeholder groups. And thus, also, we need to kind of think about how we can educate other stakeholder groups as well about the presence of these biases and potentially eliminate and their minimization.
Good. So we're down to the last 20 minutes. Ragu, I want to just put that question to you, and then we want to move through some of the other ones that have been coming through here. So thanks to everyone in the audience who's popping them in. But you've gone and built AI systems. So how have you ensured that the systems you're building don't in any way have biases encoded into them?
So I take it in a different approach than Rita and Dragan. The way for us, algorithms and machine learning and everything is one side of it, but what data are we actually feeding into it, right? If the users or the organizations got already biased data, then I cannot blame an AI system or a machine learning to say that, okay, that was biased towards like 18 to 21 Asian or some kind of a race and those things. So I always go back to the data, and then we always see today's world where I sit and where I see is like money is not, or a Bitcoin cryptocurrency is not the wealthiest thing in the world. The data is the wealthiest thing, right? Today, we are doing a major project with the cryptocurrency, but I can tell you in that, like, there are certain Twitter feeds. Say Elon Musk tweets something, right, and then automatically that particular cryptocurrency either goes up 500 folds or drops 500 folds, right? So how do we actually control that? That's all depends on the data, what you're actually feeding into the system. So I think Dragan was spot on and Rita was spot on. Like, we just need to say what is that we are actually training, what is that actually feeding into. Then if those two are clear, I think AI systems will actually get that right.
Got it. So I've got another question here that I'll put through. Maybe Rita, I'll direct this one to you in the first instance as well. In a mental health care not-for-profit, what's the best way to kick off an AI project to help with service delivery? So how do they get started?
Well, I'm a hack queen, so I would do a hackathon, right? But I would use
Hire Rita and bring her in for a day, and she'll teach
or
you.
you can figure it out yourself as well. But you got to start by understanding the challenge, and then once you understand the kind of challenges that you're having, then you can start to ideate on what's possible. And once you're able to ideate on what's possible, an example is, I do a lot of hacking at my previous role, but I brought my hacking skills to it. Is we were thinking about, how do we solve the challenge of low-sightedness and being able to read, or being able to understand someone's emotion, or being able to understand the gender of someone and know if they're listening. So we used a computer vision cognitive service that allowed you to take photos of the people around you and get descriptions, etc. So in the mental health setting, you would think about, what are some of the things that are going on? Are people forgetting things? Are they, do they need prompting? What are some of the challenges? And then once you know that, then you can start to use some of these AI solutions to design something that may solve some of those challenges.
Got it. Thank you. I'm going to grab another audience question here. This one directed to Dragan. VicGov is about to start reskilling 5,000 workers over the next 4 years in AI analytics, cybersecurity, digital operations, etc., using traditional learned training methods. How would learning analytics apply to this program?
Thanks much, and that's a great question. Obviously, with learning analytics, what we want to do is to kind of enhance experience of the learners who are involved into that whole process. So we would basically see the use of learning analytics in that whole process from, first of all, understanding and creating opportunities for these learners that require upskilling and reskilling, understanding their needs, their goals, and what they want to achieve, and then basically kind of creating the type of personalized pathways that it can have inside of their journeys for education. But then as they are also going through that kind of upskilling and reskilling, what we want to also do is to make sure that they get sufficient personalized support. So that really means that they need to be able to get very personalized feedback, personalized touch, but at the same time, governments are often not really as generous in terms of the kind of adding extra funding that you need to kind of cater to all these 5,000 students as if they are having personal tutors. So learning analytics is basically helping us, and we achieved already some of the kind of results as well with that kind of personalized feedback, in a way that by analyzing the types of data that is out there, we are aiming to empower the teaching staff so that they can kind of, based on the progression of certain patterns that we are observing in our learners' interaction with different types of resources, we can offer them very much personalized feedback and personalized support. The other thing is how we can see learning analytics and even additionally AI in education can help us basically have that kind of very quick first touch. So the use of this kind of Watson-empowered, IBM Watson-empowered chatbots was really one of the most popular teaching assistants back in the US at Georgia Tech University inside of their Master of Data Science. Jill Watson basically was rated by the students by far the best teaching assistant. Why? Because she was over there 24/7 answering students' questions immediately. Obviously, she was also doing another important thing, and that's basically the triage of the types of questions. So she was really good at answering these procedural questions, while content questions were then sent to the human teaching assistants or the teaching members of the team. So those are some of the things that we are actually thinking, and also identifying as people engage into some of upskilling and reskilling programs. They're often very busy people. And what happens is when you are busy, you have a day job, you also have family responsibilities, and you start off all of a sudden lagging behind some of these things. So learning analytics should help us also identify people who are potentially struggling with some of these type of things, and then creating the kind of additional program opportunities for them so they don't give up, but they can continue with their progression as they are going inside of some of these initiatives.
Okay, thank you for that.
If I may add on that, there are quite a few startups who started the work on it, like understanding what is the user learning style is. Like some people like graphics, some people like videos, some people like text. Probably latter one is not my preference. I don't like to read the text. I like to watch, and then I like to do the animation and then get the stuff. So side by side, there is an animation on your screen, and then walking through as a real person saying that, okay, this module you might 10 minutes is your time, but if you read it in 7 minutes, that means next 3 modules are going to be reduced it because you learn in a different way.
The
So I'm
whole
going to teach you in a different,
learning is so exciting. And I
Yeah.
think, for people like me, I like to learn hands-on. So that's why I'm a hacker. So I have to go in and learn it, right? And so there's a lot, everyone's got their own learning style.
So I just basically here kind of flag one thing, that in research we have over 40 years of evidence that learning styles don't work. So learning styles are a myth. What we know, on the other hand, with respect to the personalized, and I think what Ragu and Rita are trying to say is the learning strategies. So we basically have a different way how we approach our learning. We have different way, like what is like, for example, just the scheduling of our learning. Just the basic to kind of engaging with the particular kind of operations when we are operating information, like, whether you want to read just something, or you want to kind of try something on, or you want to test yourself if you are good at something. That's the kind of adaptive learning that we are seeing that is very effective. These type of systems that we're trying to kind of personalize that based on your preferences are in some cases increasing the satisfaction, but they are not necessarily increasing performance. On the contrary, we even found the studies as well that are showing otherwise.
All right, time, of course, is against us. We're down to our last 30 minutes here. We've got quite a few questions to the audience, but I'm going to sneak one of my own here before we move on. Now, if I've heard correctly, AI is doing one of two things. It's either taking away the jobs we don't want to do, which are the boring, dull, repetitive, and potentially dangerous jobs. And it's also taking away jobs that we probably can't do or aren't very good at, which is things like working with massive data sets and taking ideas in mind that no single human brain could actually probably comprehend, like these massive databases that we have in existence at the moment. So I've got these issues at one end and the other end, and I sense them potentially moving up or down over time. So if we look, though, at the question of which jobs will be created, I think we've spoken to that. What about the jobs that will disappear? What do you think they might be, and which ones will go first? Therefore, for those of us out there that might potentially be in one of those jobs which is going to disappear or at least change or evolve, what do we do to move quickly beyond the limited lifespan that's in front of us? So maybe, Ragu, I'll start with you on that one.
Definitely. I would strongly suggest that any operational jobs would be, it's not that they will go, but people who are doing operational jobs are like pretty much like, say, call center jobs, are like a, accounts payable jobs. If the digital employees, what we build is like connecting into all these areas, and then they're doing invoice processing, payments, receiving certain, triaging the calls before it goes to the human. All these jobs are like, not because it's not skill set, but it's about the entry level jobs which people are looking into, and they come in, and then when a company looks at it and then they try to replace this with the AI or digital employees, then what happens is those jobs are at the highest churn rate for that, so that those jobs will be gone. And like you said, like the data, the bigger data set analysis, like, if you have 10,000 employees and if you're looking to onboard 100 in a week, and then that onboarding jobs are going to be really messy, and then you need to have 10 different systems to be connected, and then ordering, purchasing, all those jobs are going to be procurement jobs. Those are, I would believe that they will be at a stake at this stage.
Put it simply, anything that involves cutting and pasting.
I should have said that, actually.
I think a lot of people are doing.
So anyone who makes a living out of paper mache, they're out of business then? Is that? No, different one. Sorry.
I don't know, that could be an art form.
True. All right, so I've got a few more audience questions here. I'm going to pick a couple out now. One here, in response to the previous question, I'm an undergraduate student in my second year in applied data science. Would you recommend doing a master's degree right after the undergraduate, or gaining some real world work experience?
If I can start, I will tell you I'm struggling to hire certain people, so I can easily tell you what you should be looking at next. So masters, US is masters is a big thing for US, right? I mean, in US, masters is like considered to be entry point after the masters. But I got big center of excellence in Eastern Europe and Mexico. So in Mexico, like other way around, they don't consider masters as important. They look at the certain qualifications and how much experience you have as a data science or data analyst or analytical. So certain technical knowledge like you GoLang and machine learning, NLP. Majorly NLP is picking up, like if you have NLP experience, if you created some natural language processing with anything like voice to text, text to voice, connecting into the videos, I think you're looking for, definitely you're looking at six digit number salary straight away, because that is the hot jobs which we struggle to get, because every company is trying to pick up the right people, right? I mean, in US, that's how it is. So I would suggest, if I were having 2 masters, I would suggest that I would hold back on masters. I know it's been hypocritical to say that I've done that, but I would get a real work experience, because by the time you finish your masters, 2 years into the 2 years after you are entering into the workforce, already everything has changed. 2 years is a long time in AI. I can tell you that things will change very quickly.
Dragan, do you have a thought on that?
That's a really good question. I mean, obviously, I trust Ragu more from kind of perspectives. He's hiring people in industry and looking more from this kind of opportunities. I personally think for doing kind of a professional focused masters, which is majority of the master type of things that are here in Australia, probably it's not a bad thing to have some level of work experience. And especially, and what I think we need to also think about master type of degrees as well, is where they are actually not only introducing certain technologies, but they are also introducing different types of work experience as well. So the students have that kind of, when I was back in Canada, students always had this kind of opportunity to do some co-op, something that's basically having these placements and something that's kind of creating already that kind of work experience. So while obviously as a kind of somebody who works in the industry sector or in education sector, I'd really like to see more people coming in. I think it's not a bad idea to go and directly go into the workforce. There are also many professionals as well in artificial intelligence that are taking a fair bit of massive open online courses, MOOCs, whether that's Coursera or edX, and there are these kind of small specializations. I can tell you also, even many of my PhD students, like 10 years ago, would be mostly kind of learning different types of AI new methods through MOOCs. Only now we have inside of our universities as well sufficient number of courses that can support some of these type of things. The other thing that I would probably suggest to consider as well is doing that part-time. So having a kind of a full-time job and doing a master as a part-time type of a thing, that is a kind of a side thing. And there are, and I think in Australian type of way how we are doing things, and there are many also fully online degrees as well. So in a way that cuts potentially some of that kind of student experience that you may have, but at the same time, you're in the workplace, at the same time, you're getting some additional education.
Got it. So we're down to the last 5 minutes. I'm going to try and squeeze a few more questions in here. Rita, this one's directed to you. We have talked about learning needs to support transition to AI. Can you please also touch on where you have seen a requirement for change management around this, and what have been some of the strategies you've seen to support this shift?
Is that a question for?
It is a question for Rita in the first instance.
Rita, yeah, please.
Change management.
Change management.
Well, I think the way it actually is quite a big area because as you try to create intelligence-driven organizations and you have to start to, figure out ways of how you're going to do that, there's that whole cultural example, work that you have to do around building a data culture. And so that's where change management can have a massive impact. And it was really interesting, Brad, I noticed in some of the questions that someone was asking about these low-code apps. Yeah. And the whole idea is like, you know, we've been living in Excel for 40 years. Like, imagine if you had other tools that could actually allow you to, you know, create apps, etc. And some of these low code apps, like Power Apps that was mentioned in the questions, they'd be amazing. And so the change management that would be required would be to start to empower people to be able to allow them to, you know, build their apps and be able to bring in knowledge from the organization and start to, you know, interact with a lot of the data that they may have that's buried in, you know, a data lake or somewhere, and start to use that side of things. So I think there's a massive opportunity for change management in that space as you start to think about the cultural aspects of the AI coming into an organization as they become more intelligent.
All right. Did anyone else want to jump on that one, or should we move on?
I think I certainly extent I mentioned something, but what we are seeing is that we work also a fair bit with different public sector organizations and even private sector organizations, whether it's healthcare or education. And what we are basically finding is a fair bit of resistance as well to some of these type of innovations. And that resistance is not coming necessarily only because people don't want to use certain technologies, but because also there's some certain prior baggage as well, especially with the use of data and kind of the fear for data to be used in a punitive way, right? So for kind of quality assurance, etc. So you would be kind of, you know, surprised, even kind of very highly qualified professionals such as surgeons and doctors are not necessarily always welcoming some of these things, although they are also fairly data literate about some of these things. Therefore, I think many organizations really underestimate the extent to which that change management is necessary and providing certain opportunities for creating that organizational culture that is necessary to happen if you want to kind of effectively use some of these data science technologies or AI technologies.
It's certainly one thing to be able to have an AI skill set, but then being able to actually utilize that effectively in an organization requires the organization to be able to absorb that skill set and use it for something meaningful. Otherwise, it's not really being put into play. But we're almost out of time. One very quick question I want to put through here, and then I want to ask you to each wrap up quickly. What are some effective ways that self-regulated learners can communicate their self-learning and related skills to potential employers?
What about a bit of micro-badging?
Micro-badging, right?
Well, I find that really works. Like if you're getting a credential and you're graduating from online learning, then, you know, that can be also really great. But I know that Monash have some fantastic short courses and a whole range of different things that you can do. But I'll perhaps let Dragan answer that question.
That's a great question. I think, Rita, you already nailed part of it, I think, really nicely. The other part of it is really kind of demonstrated that you are capable to learn certain things without formal instruction, right? That you basically picked up. I work on this kind of GitHub project and I contributed some of these things. Like, you know, I used some of these courses out there. I work on this GitHub project and this is my portfolio as well. So that really, to me, it's a good sign that you are a person who is driven, who is also able to learn something by themselves and going forwards with some of these type of skills.
Brilliant.
Absolutely. I think, you know, I would suggest is get a Trello or something and then make your project. Learning what you learned, what projects you've done, so you're showing that your work, it's like a professional work environment. You're showing that I've learned these courses, I developed this, you know, GitHub repositories which I can share publicly, and then, you know, there are a lot of tools available to do that. Like, you know, I mean, you can do conversational engines and the NLP tools you can download from GitHub, and then just experiment it, and then get your interest on which area you want to go, and then you could just start improving upon.
Right. Well,
meetups and those kind of things where you get to interact with other people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. I'm jumping in now because we're out of time, unfortunately. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone out in the audience, thank you so much for tuning in today. To our amazing panelists, Dragan, Rita, Ragu, thank you so much for giving your time and your insights today. There's been a lot to take out of this. There's a lot more conversation still to happen. These issues aren't going to resolve themselves anytime soon, because it's often down to us to be out there learning and building up our own skill sets and knowledge in order to feel our way through this future that's unfolding at the moment. So thank you all for sharing what you've shared. Just to let everyone else out there know that we will be sending out a survey shortly via your email, so please keep a lookout for that. I think that's also being linked in the chat box below, but you'll definitely be contacted afterwards. Thank you all for your time and attention. We look forward to seeing you at future events. On behalf of Monash Tech Talks, thank you all very much.